So welcome back to the lecture series Climate Protection after a longer break than as expected. But anyway, today I'm blessed to welcome Professor Belachew Gebrewold from the Management Center Innsbruck. Professor Gebrewold deals intensively with migration and the different motivations behind it. In particular, Professor Belachew deals with migrations from Africa to Europe, and today he is focusing on the connection between climate change and migration. A short search on the internet shows that Professor Gebrewold studied at the end of the 1980s and beginning of the 1990s philosophy in Ethiopia. In the following 10 years, he completed various degrees at the University of Innsbruck and Hamburg. To be more precisely, he got his degrees in philosophy, geology, and international politics. He also completed the Peace Studies program in Innsbruck. Between 2002 and 2005, Professor Gebrewold completed the MA programs, Peace, Security, Development, and International Conflict Transformation. And the last and final step so far, Belachew Gebrewold habilitated in political science in 2010, and since that he is working at the Management Center Innsbruck as head of department and study programs. His latest book, at least which I was able to research, was published in 2019, as you can see on the slide, Human Traffic and Exploitation, Lessons from Europe. And now I would like to welcome Professor Belachew Gebrewold and look forward to the lecture and the following discussion. Thank you for welcome.
Good afternoon and welcome to my presentation on climate change and migration. Thank you for your kind introduction and also for the invitation to talk on this important issue, climate change and migration. As my colleague told you already, dear audience, my name is Belachew Gebrewold, originally from Ethiopia, and I have been working on this topic for, let me say, almost for the past 15, 16 years on the issue of migration and the climate change. As someone, I would say, someone who has been affected by climate change, I think I'm also going to share with you some experience of my own, because I come from Ethiopia and also from a region, from countryside, which is affected by increasing climate change in an increasingly dramatic way for the people in the countryside, especially for farmers who are dependent on a regular rain. Climate change is an extremely pressing and urgent issue. So what am I going to talk about? Let me tell you briefly the outline. I show you the outline. I would like to start with migration theories, some migration theories, because it's important also to base on what I'm saying on some theoretical reflections. And then I will show the slow onset climate impacts. That means how climate change is slowly but steadily affecting people. And then on the third step, I would like to show you the rapid onset impacts. That means how climate change is rapidly affecting different segments of society. And I would like to conclude with some thoughts at the end. Yeah, migration theories. There are different theoretical approaches regarding the causes of migration. It is very often diverse depending on which discipline or against the background of which discipline you are studying migration. There are different theoretical approaches. So usually they are categorized in three groups. These theoretical reflections of migration. One is so-called the classical economic approaches. The second one is push-pull theories, and the third one is so-called neo-economics of labor migration. So based on these three concepts, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with theories that long. Instead, just to give you some ideas about those theories. And so these are, let us say, the keys to understand what migration is. But how are these theories usually categorized, and especially from climate change point of view, as well as in general? We could see migration, or cause of migration, from humanitarian crisis point of view, from armed conflicts point of view, from environmental catastrophes point of view. This is, which I'm going to explain also later on, the rapid onset impact. And there is also a slow onset impact, which is based on poverty, social exclusion, unemployment, etc., pushing people. Now, why do I put here these three question marks? It is just to help you think or reflect. Maybe there are also other theoretical approaches that explain why people move, not just now in the global south, but also in the European history itself. Why did so many Germans move to the United States? So many Italians move to the United States or to Latin American countries? And also from other Western European countries, why did they move to North America, or from England, etc., to Australia, and etc.? So there are different causes why people move. So here the point is just to tell you that it is not always the rapid onset or just slow onset. Instead, there could be also other causes for migration. And this quotation mark also, this question mark, contains one of my migration research areas, which I'm not going to address today, which is a different approach, but just try to keep in mind or reflect, maybe there are also other causes here besides these economic or political or environmental causes. So what is this, the classical macroeconomic and the microeconomic theory? What is it about? Usually in migration discussion, migration literature and scholarship, it is understood as migrants as opportunity seekers. That means they make kind of cost-benefit analysis. How much would it cost if I stay here? How much would be the benefit if I move on? And what are the costs if I move on? And the risks, benefits, costs, etc. So usually migrants are seen as people, as kind of entrepreneurs, let us say, based on this cost-benefit analysis, that they make rational choices. Say if they decide to move to destination A or destination B, first, so they have to think about what does it make for me, what kind of difference is it going to make from economic point of view, etc. And migration in this theoretical approach is seen as a flow from low wage to high wage labor markets. That means from poor regions to rich regions. That means where you get more than you would get in your home country or in your home region, from low opportunity to high opportunity locations. So this is, again, this rational choice approach. And why is this rational choice approach or cost-benefit analysis? It is because of relative deprivation. Relative deprivation means that you are not necessarily in absolute poverty. Instead, you compare what you have and what others have and what you could have. So based on this, the relative poverty or your perception of your poverty increases depending on how much others have or how much you could have. So that is why it is called this relative deprivation. So it is not absolute poverty, instead, just something in comparison. And in this comparison, what we see is that there is a kind of disequilibrium between what you wish and what you are what you are where you are now. the wishes are what you could achieve, what you want to achieve. The actual standard of living is that what you actually have now and where you are. So if there is gap between your wishes and your actual standard of living, gap in the for the sake of the wishes, that means at the destination you could achieve more than what you have here, the probability that you move is much higher. And additionally, it is seen that in this theoretical context, the more new consumer goods and styles and you know, yeah, fashion or whatever comes, the more people tend to move, because what they see they cannot afford here. Instead, they have to move. If it is about cars, if it is about television, if it is about a house, if it is about clothes, etc. If you think that what is outside is much more better or much more beautiful than what you have here, the probability that you decide to move is much higher. So nowadays, for example, mobile phones, laptops, etc., new technologies like television, etc., push also people. They not only just give information to start your journey, but also they could become the objectives or the objects of desire. That means you would like to own them once, but for that you have to work somewhere, because with what you earn at your in your village or in your country, you are not going to achieve that. Instead, you have to move in order to uh, achieve, let's say, these these new goods and styles. So that is again another motivation to move. So that is so-called, in brief, is the classical macroeconomic and microeconomic theoretical approach. And we have the so-called push-pull theoretical approach, which is based on four factors. So that shape migration. So we have factors that determine at origin, factors that determine at destination. There are intervening factors or facilitating factors and obstacles, and there are personal factors. Let me explain briefly what is the difference between those factors. At origin, people, when they experience poverty, lack of opportunities, they, of course, decide to move. And that is not peculiarly, and I would like to underline this one as much as possible. In all migration histories, what we observe is that be it material poverty or other values that push you to move, you observe the difference between what you have here and what you could achieve somewhere. You start to make migration decisions. So poverty, lack of opportunities, or migration networks. That means there are already people who migrated in your area, and you get information from them, or you are in connection with them. Therefore, this facilitates as well that you're taking the journey. That means you will get more information. Environmental degradation, which is in our case related to climate change, another push factor that forces people to move. If there are conflicts, if there are wars nowadays, in the case of Ukraine, we know what is going on, and also in the case of Syria, in the case of Afghanistan, in the case of Iraq, in the case of Ethiopia, or in the case of Venezuela, where there are political instability and conflict and wars, people move. People move. Yeah. So what happens at the origin? That means the negative happenings at origin push people. So I think that is quite obvious. And the other thing is what is at the destination? What kind of opportunities are there? Are there jobs? What about social services? For example, education, health services, insurance, if you don't have jobs, if you are unemployed. And you need all those information before you move. And are there already some family members who are abroad and they give you information? Or when you go there, and they will give you shelter, at least at the beginning, until you become self-sufficient. So you can, where you can stay is provided. Therefore, the inclination to move will be stronger. And are there also social networks with others who are already there? And this, of course, facilitates your decision or your movement, your migration. And what happens very often, I don't know how many of you have traveled to the global south, urban areas are exploding, and young people are moving from countryside to the urban areas. So large urban areas with their greater range of economic opportunities, better services, even within the global south, not just in the north, global north, even within the global south, the urban areas are much more, let us say, modernized than the countryside, the rural areas. Therefore, for many people, especially young people, urban areas are very attractive destinations because there are better services, and from the schooling perspective, from the university perspective, from social services in general perspective. If you are sick, though, you have better hospitals than in the countryside. So there is this discrepancy between urban and rural areas also, which push many young people from countryside to urban areas. And also there are capitalist system and global markets playing a big role. For example, nowadays we know the capitalist system is a global system. It is everywhere. Investors go around the world. And also workers go around the world looking for jobs. And one perfect example is this World Championship, Football World Championship, which is going to take place in 6 months' time in Qatar. How many people from many poor countries, especially South Asia, went to Qatar to work in very, let us say, inhuman conditions. So that is part of the global capitalist system or global markets. Or if you take, I don't know, if you take Nepal, Vietnam, where people from countryside go work in garment factories, and in very also inhuman conditions as laborers, in spite of the fact that it is very challenging working condition, but it is still better than life in the countryside or somewhere else. Still, people move where there are jobs. Yeah. So this capitalist system, global market system, is facilitating that people move seeking jobs. Yeah. Or in many rich countries like Austria, Germany, and in Europe and the West in general, what happens is that there are immigrant jobs because there are increasingly an increasing number of immigrants. This means immigration produces immigrant jobs. There are many jobs which are not done by locals, be it in Austria, be it in Germany, because they are dangerous, because they are dirty, because they are difficult. They are not usually taken over by the locals, instead by foreigners. You know by yourself, you know to yourself how many Eastern Europeans work in what kind of conditions and which kind of jobs they are doing. Many refugees or immigrants from Africa or from Asia taking jobs which usually locals do not do here. And then there is so-called strict migration laws contribute to emergence of pro-migrant institutions. Now, what does it mean? This applies only in democratic countries in the West. So if you see as an Austrian that the rights of migrants, immigrants are violated, as, let us say, open, liberal person who believes in equality and human rights, you do not ignore, and you start kind of initiatives, campaign to respect the rights of these immigrants. Usually right-wing groups do not do it, but usually liberal or left-wing people trying to support to protect the rights of immigrants. So in democratic countries, this applies only to democratic political systems. Strict migration laws, that means laws that usually even undermine the rights of immigrants, paradoxically, we would say, create or support the emergence of pro-migrant institutions, that means human rights institutions, civil society groups who promote these values would emerge and become even influential and bigger. And also there are so-called intervening or facilitating facilitators or obstacles. This means once you decide to move, you have to also know, okay, what am I going to face when I start my journey? So what is the geographic situation? Many people from Africa, from sub-Saharan Africa, they know that there is the Sahara Desert. They know that there is the Mediterranean Sea, or many Latin Americans know it is not easy to cross to the United States. So there are these geographic factors, rivers, mountains, fences. If you take, for example, Ceuta and Melilla, and on Morocco, which is a Spanish territory, this enclave on Moroccan territory. And of course, these are hindrances, these are obstacles. So for migrants, it's also important to know how am I going to overcome those fences. There are barbed wires, there are electric sensors, there are police and military personnel standing there and trying to push back those migrants. So these geographic factors have to be also taken into account. And also, before I move, I have to know what kind of obstacles are going to be. For example, my property rights, are the property rights in destination? If I, for example, work hard and earn my money, is what the situation of my property rights, bureaucratic constraints, how is the bureaucracy there to get a residence visa or resident permits and similar things. Yeah. How am I going to enter requirements, etc. All those things are important to take into account when you make migration decision. And also financial resources. Do I have the resources to move? How much money do I need if I'm coming from sub-Saharan Africa, moving to Europe, or from South Asia, or from the Middle East, trying to enter Europe? What are the chances and etc. So these they have to be taken into account. Yeah? And the paucity of information, that means lack of information, can have negative impact on my migration decision. Do we have enough information? And information is extremely important in migration. The more information there is, the more migration, and also vice versa. The more migration from an origin, the more information will flow back, because people send greetings to their family members, to their relatives, and they tell how the situation is and how they overcome the obstacles. So the more information those people at home get, the higher the tendency also to migrate, because they know, okay, where are the obstacles and how can I overcome them, and maybe I can take a different route and I organize it differently, etc. So this is very important in the migration decision. That means collecting enough and reliable information. And also, for example, what kind of news you send back. And many times what happens is that those who arrived, they send pictures taken in front of a building. The building looks beautiful. Even there are pictures taken in front of a car, even if the car does not belong to me. And people at home believe that, he has already made it. He has even a car. Therefore, if he made it, why not me? And therefore, I can start also organizing my own trip. And there are many studies that show, from Latin America to the United States, etc., how this kind of information being sent back home can have impact on migration. And also personal factors that play a role is Wealth, that means from the resources point of view, how much resource do I have? Age, that means it is usually between 16 years old and about 45 or 40 years old people in general try to move or decide to move. And it is usually male, and now also increasingly female, but usually male predominantly. And also ethnicity. There are some ethnic groups in different countries who have better connections and a lot of members who have already moved. And the more people move from that ethnic group, also the more people would also follow. Yeah. And then the age, as I said before, plays an important role. Younger people are more mobile than elderly people. And the third category, theoretical approach, and then I finish the theoretical one so that you are not bored. This is called the new economics of labor migration, which is, in the first one, the macroeconomic and the microeconomic, I told you that the individual making decisions, but here in the new economics of labor migration, it is said that it is not just an individual who makes decisions, it's also the household. So if someone decides to migrate from home, there are usually decisions taken by both by the person who migrates as well as by the household members. So that is a different approach, let us say, different approach of migration decision. That the migrants will repay the costs and the absence from household workforce by remitting money home, which means that if you migrate from a family, you are not, of course, you are not going to work anymore on the field of your family. So it is family minus one in this case. Yeah. But what does it mean? It means that, okay, you are not available for us anymore, but at least you are going to send back money home, and therefore we can compensate this loss by getting money from you. And this money to get it back from you means that income diversification. So if we are farmers and it is a farmer's family and we used to survive from our produce from our field, if you are going to send some money home, so the income is diversified. And here on the right side, regarding this diversification, I hope you can see that how much money is flowing back every year. Just because of the corona situation, it has a bit decreased. You can see here, for example, how much money is being sent back to India. Last year, it was 87 billion US dollars Indians living abroad sent back. China 53 billion, Mexico 53 billion, Philippines 36, Egypt 33, Pakistan 33, Bangladesh 23, Vietnam, etc. You see here, all are billions in US dollars. This is a lot of money, and it is much more than the development aid usually the countries get. So that is much more than development aid which is being given by the OECD countries. So migration is very attractive for many countries. So the remittance is the money sent back home. And on the right side here in this green energy or green or blue, what you can see is that the percentage of GDP. In the case of Tonga, it makes 44% of the GDP of Tonga. In the case of Lebanon, 35%. Kyrgyzstan 30% of GDP, Tajikistan 28%, Honduras 27%, El Salvador 26%, etc. So you see here, even from the GDP point of view, migration is highly profitable. Now, how is the European Union, now after having seen this theoretical reflection, how is the European Union as a case study, let us say, seeing migration and what kind of the plans and programs are there? European Union, when there was this peak of migration peak in 2014-15, came up with the European agenda on migration, and that was a reaction to the flow of migration from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and from other countries. And interestingly, but I cannot go into details because that is a different issue. Interestingly, the focus of Europe was immediately on Africa. Sorry, on Africa, saying, "Oh, okay, we have to do more in Africa so that people would not come." But from the numbers point of view, in those years, 20, 24, 25, 26, the majority, the highest majority of people coming to Europe were not Africans, and instead Syrians, were Iraqis and Afghans and etc. But interesting, different issue which I cannot address due to time constraint, but the reaction was immediately on Africa. Anyway, there were projects created immediately in 2025 to address the causes of irregular migration. And the Emergency Trust Fund for Africa was created that time in 2020, 4.7 billion. In between, it is more than 5 billion US dollars. And there are four areas important in addressing the causes of migration. Unemployment or lack of economic growth or economic opportunities, or to improve migration and migration movement, or to improve governance and conflict prevention. And finally, especially in our case, important, which from now on I'm going to focus on, is the resilience of communities to strengthen. Resilience from the environmental point of view, from climate change point of view, and so this one we are going to see from now on. And to show you the projects, what European Union after that, that has been doing is that in North Africa, various projects going on in 2030, projects for 900 million in the Sahel region. These are the countries: Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, etc. More than 2 billion. And in the Horn of Africa, as you can see here, in between 2 billion as well. Also, the data is here 2020, but if you take the one of this year, it is about 2 billion. So here, these are the focal areas where the project, this European Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, trying to address economic opportunities, migration management, governance, and conflict prevention, and resilience of communities, especially from the climate change point of view. Now, we are moving towards this climate approach to migration. Yeah. And there are two approaches. The one is the rapid onset, which I mentioned before, and the other one is the slow onset. Let me show you very briefly before I go into details. Yeah. In the case of the rapid onset events, which we are going to see in detail soon, they are disaster-related displacement affecting especially poor countries. Yeah? So these poor countries have limited resources to confront disasters. For example, if there are some kind of environmental disasters, like what happened last year in Germany, as a German, you can cope with that much easier than, for example, now people exposed in the Horn of Africa to these environmental disasters. But we are going to see that one. And ironically and tragically, I would say, low and middle income countries account for 95% of global total of this disaster displacement. So 95% of the global total is in low and middle income countries. Small islands like Fiji, Tonga, Belize, Cuba, Haiti, etc., affected severely by this climate change related to displacement and migration. The slow onset climate impacts are seen in the form of water stress. The crops fail because the rain is not coming in time, or it is coming too early, or the sea level rise, etc. So these are the things which we are going to see from now on, how they are causing migration. So slow onset climate impacts on migration. And this is slow impacts, slow onset impacts. What happens is that people migrate due to slow climate onset, climate change impacts. These include water scarcity, because poor countries, many countries here in the global south are increasingly being affected by water scarcity because of the prolonged dry season, low crop productivity, again because of the water shortage, sea level rise, and the storm surge. Eastern Africa, for example, Southeastern African region like Tanzania, like Mozambique, like Malawi, being more or less beaten, highly affected. Latin American, especially Central American countries, we know that that happens around August, September every year. So this is increasing, not decreasing. Yeah. So some places are becoming less livable, not just poor countries, and even Australia itself. Many states in Australia are becoming more unlivable because either it is a lot of a high degree of heat, or it is flood, it is wildfire. So even in many developed countries, the situation is becoming non-livable. So heat stress, extreme events, land loss, this is increasing, not decreasing, as you know. From this slow onset impact point of view, what we can see is what is contributing also to migration is that in the context of climate change, the population increase. For example, if you take many African countries, population growth is still very high. The population growth rate is very high. And therefore, I very, very much hope is that the African Union and individual states and governments react urgently to reduce this population growth rate. And one of the means is to keep girls in schools and to not to force them to marry early and destroy their lives. Of course, girls should not be kind of seen as a means to reduce the population increase. Instead, for their own self, they have to stay in school. But also we have to see population growth takes place rapidly, especially because girls do not have opportunities to go to school or to stay in school. So population increase has to be taken into account. Because of climate change, lower agricultural productivity has become normal. So I remember when I was a small boy, before going for further studies, the productivity on our land was much more predictable, and the irregularity of rainy season was also much more predictable. But nowadays it is almost impossible to predict when rain is going to come and when it is going to go. And further, non-diversified economy, especially in poor countries, is pushing people to move from countryside into urban areas, from urban areas to abroad, which means that there is unabsorbed labor into non-agricultural and less climate-sensitive sectors. So many countries, poor countries, are too much dependent on agriculture, and the agriculture is too much dependent on rain-fed agriculture. So there is this structural problem because of poverty, because of mismanagement, because of corruption, and yeah. So these are climate-sensitive sectors because depending on rain, the amount of rain, and amount of the heat, etc., the productivity, of course, decreases or increases. Now, here you see an overview of climate change and macro trends on living on livelihoods in key ecosystems and possible migration trends by 2050 as a projection here. And here on the left side, you see main climatic influences on migration by ecosystem type. And here, dry lands are taken as an example. So dry lands, that means extreme heat events take place in those dry lands. There are droughts, there is dryness, and there is precipitation variability. And if you combine this with other macro trends here, that means if there is already growing intensification and market orientation of agriculture. So if if the government decides to export agricultural products, and if the agriculture products are in such a way that they fill the bank of the country with kind of foreign currency, and what is going to happen is the agriculture is going to be more market oriented. Yeah? And there is again land degradation in different parts of poor countries. There is water scarcity. There is depletion of soil nutrients, and there are also land grabs taking place. Now, if we take these two ones, that means on the one hand, these dry lands and their characteristics, but also from the macroeconomic point of view, there are these policies taking place, intensification and market orientation, land degradation, as well as land grabs. What is the outcome going to be? Where it is going to lead us? What kind of impact is going to be on livelihoods? That means it is going to be pastoralism is going to decline. Specialized livestock pasturing is going to increase because of this market-oriented and intensified growing. Average farm size is going to shrink, and small-scale farms are going to decrease. And what is going to happen? Those people are going to move within the country to some places, or they are going to move abroad. So from the climatic point of view, on the left side, you see here the dry land. From the policy point of view here, on the macro level, you see these policies. And what is the impact? The impact is going to be that people are going to move. So they are going to move outside. They are going to move to other regions and to other countries. So the labor migration increases, rural to urban migration increases, extreme event increase, also distress migration. Yeah. So extreme events in this case here are disasters. Yeah. So that is this connection between the climatic one, the macroeconomic one, and these two pushing people to move within country as well as somewhere else. There are evidences also which we could observe. In sub-Saharan Africa, there are such kind of evidences. It is not just something theoretical. So from this, let us move to the main part, which is the rapid onset impacts. Yeah? So what is going on? There is data projection from the World Bank, which shows that internal climate migrants are rapidly becoming the human face of climate change. This is a quotation from this study. By 2050, in just 3 regions, that is Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, climate change could force more than 143 million people to move within their countries. That is not yet a migration crossing borders. For example, in the case of Sub-Saharan Africa, above there you see 86 million by 2050 are going to be internally displaced or internal migrants. In the planting seasons, there is a farmer in Ethiopia saying, in the planting seasons, it would not rain, but when we did not want it, it would rain. This created drought, and because of this, I did not want to suffer anymore. I wanted to try my luck in the city, so I came to Hawassa, which is one of the biggest cities in Ethiopia. In the case of South Asia, by 2050, especially regarding Bangladesh, there will be a huge internal migration, 40 million projected. Floods come every year, but this year the situation is worse. Now all my family is living in one relative's house. I don't want to go back to my village, mainly because of the flood. In Dhaka, I can work and have a good, secure life. In Latin America, it is projected by 2050, 17 million. So I don't want to, I don't need, I think, to read it. So just you know what is going on. So the trend is extremely worrying. And also some figures to show you here. By 2050, if we take 6 regions, because the one I showed you before were 4 regions, but if we take 6 regions, by 2050, without concrete climate and development action, climate change could lead more than 216 million people in 6 regions to migrate within their own countries. That is Eastern Europe and Central Asia, 5 million, North Africa, 19 million, East Asia and the Pacific, 49 million, South Asia, 40 million, Sub-Saharan Africa, 86 million. So, and Latin America, 17 million. So many people are expected to be displaced, going to move within their countries by 2050. That means in total 216 million. Now, just to explain it more, Sub-Saharan Africa, as many as 85.7 million, 86 million, that is the total 4.2 of the total population of Sub-Saharan Africa that's going to be by then. So who is vulnerable? Because vulnerable are especially people from fragile dry lands and coastlines in Sub-Saharan Africa who are going to be mainly affected. And these people from the countryside are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. If the rain is not predictable, what is going to happen? Of course, they cannot produce and they have to move. If we take East Asia and the Pacific, 48 million, which is 2.5 of the total population. North Africa is the highest in relation to the percentage of the population. 9% of the total population is going to be displaced because of the water scarcity. There is already this tension between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, and the Nile Delta. What is going to happen? What is going to be its impact? And if we move to Latin America, Eastern Europe, and South Asia, what is, as I showed before, Latin America, 2.6 of the total population. In Eastern Europe and Central Asia, 2.3% of the population. South Asia, 1% of the total population. Especially Bangladesh is one of the highly endangered countries in that region, and probably even in the world. So, why is it important to take action on internal climate action? So, what should be done? As studies show, again from the World Bank from 2021, show that the number of people forced to move because of climate change could be reduced by as much as 80% if we take appropriate policies. What kind of policies are there? For example, if we cut global greenhouse gases, as the studies show, if we integrate climate migration, or if we plan for each phase, that means each phase of migration before, during, and after, to ensure positive adaptation and development outcomes. If we invest in understanding the drivers of migration, so we could reduce by 80% of what is going on as the study shows. But the new displacements have increased in the past years. If we take 2020 as an example, there is a so-called Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, which shows that there are two factors that lead to displacement. One is the climatic, the environmental one. The other is conflict and violence. As you can see here, in 2020, 40.5 million people were displaced. And out of that, 9.8 million were displaced because of conflict, and the rest was displaced by disasters like geophysical, that means earthquake, volcanic eruptions, but mainly the, the cause of displacement is weather related, that means climate related displacement. If we, sorry, if we take droughts, if we take extreme temperatures, if we take landslides, wildfires, floods, and cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, etc., these make 30 million out of these 40.5 million displacement. And these displaced people are moving within the countries, or they are going abroad as refugees or migrants. And in the case of conflicts, violence is there, violence in within communities, violence between countries, armed conflicts, or criminals, etc. But still, the main factor of displacement is the environmental one. If we take from the geographic point of view, which countries are affected by how much and by what? So this figure shows new displacement in 2020, as I said, the figure 40.5 million. If we take East Asia and the Pacific, people displaced by conflicts and violence are 186,000, and by environmental issues or disasters are 12 million. If we take, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa, conflict and violence, 6.7 million, the environmental one, or geophysical 4 million, etc. So here you see how much this geophysical or environmental is making. As I said before, 30.7 by disasters, environmental and geophysical, only 9.7 are conflict and violence. Of course, that is also a very high number, but still the geophysical, environmental, or climate-related displacement is much, much higher. Yeah, and if we take East Asia, 30% of displacement. If we take Sub-Saharan Africa, 27% of the overall displacement. Middle East and North Africa, 5% of displacement. Or South Asia, 23.8 displacement, etc. As you can see here. So that is the global whole. And then out of that, how much is South Asia, the Americas, East Asia, etc. New displacement by disasters breakdown by hazards. Now the geophysical one, as I said, earthquake, volcanic eruptions might make 11%, and weather related, that means floods, storms, earthquakes, flood, storms, wildfires, droughts, extreme temperatures and landslides make 90% of this displacement. So here we have more climate change damage and hazards than, for example, the geophysical ones. Now, as the UN climate report, I don't know whether you heard about it, last February, there was this very huge document, more than, I think, 3,000 pages, 3 or 5,000, I think 5,000 pages of UN report came out and shows that at 1.7 degrees Celsius by 2025, in many poor countries, what is going to happen is that reduced fish harvest is going to happen. Up to 70 million people are vulnerable to iron deficiency, and up to 285 million malnourished by 2025 if the 1.7 degrees Celsius is going to happen. Increased large numbers of people moving to coastal cities. Around 110 million people will be exposed to sea level rise by 2030, and up to 245 million by 2060. Depending on how we are going to decarbonize our global economy, between 17.4 million and 86 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa are going to could be forced to flee. So if we manage the global economy, decarbonize it, so it is going to be 17 million by 2030, 2050. If we do not do that, 86 million are going to be displaced by 2050. Now, currently, I don't know how many of you are following what is going on in the Horn of Africa, in East Africa. There is a huge drought problem going on, and as the UN report says, that Africa constitutes only 4% of the total carbon emissions globally. Only 4%, imagine. But most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are African countries. So how fair is that? People did not contribute to those problems and they are suffering the most. How can we just ignore that? How is it possible that people look away? Up to 20 million people in East Africa are at risk of severe hunger now, today. Up to 20 million. If you take Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, these countries are affected by severe drought. That is the fourth season that rain failed in some parts of Kenya, for example. For the fourth consecutive year, it has not rained. And there was a woman who said that starvation has become our companion, an interview partner, and a woman saying, a displaced woman. And here, there is I have to show you, unfortunately, this shocking build. This is a farmer, and he is watching how many of his sheep has died because of lack of water and because of the drought. Ethiopia is battling the worst drought in almost half a century, and in Somalia, 40% of the population are at risk of starvation. 40% of the population. And here, these are not refugees because of conflict, instead because of the drought and lack of water in Somalia. Somalia, almost 700,000 people have been forced from their homes in search of food and water. And all are not leaving, only those who can. Those who remain behind are the elderly who wait either for the rain to fall or for the young ones to come back with water. Due to 4 seasons of failed rains and unbearable high temperatures, 90% of the country is dry, Somalia. The numbers of displaced people are dramatically rising. The hunger crisis is being overshadowed by now the Russia-Ukraine crisis, because the whole attention of the world is on Ukraine. Every Ukrainian refugee is welcome. Money is being pumped into Ukraine, weapons, and all those things needed. I mean, Ukrainians deserve it in this catastrophic situation, in this unfair war of aggression by Russia. Ukrainians deserve it, this protection and sympathy. But the world's attention is on Ukraine. The European attention is Ukraine because it is in front of the Europeans at the European door. And this also shows that all human beings are not equal. Some are more equal. And the most vulnerable families are fleeing their homes in search of clean water, food, and farmland. So they are leaving their villages, their regions. They are going somewhere to find something to eat. World Food Program estimates that over 70% of IDPs in need will experience hunger. That means in this East African region, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Uganda, Somalia, Kenya. And then besides these, the Horn of Africa, Eastern African region, is affected by macroeconomically by the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the locust plague, which started in 2020. And this locust plague was the worst in 25 years in Ethiopia and Somalia, and the worst in 70 years in Kenya. And here I have some pictures for you here how the locusts are destroying, and this farmer is trying to chase them away. But of course, there are billions, and how can he chase them away? And here 2 women standing in the sorghum field, and they show how locusts have destroyed their sorghum. And you see here how locusts affected countries are being exposed to hunger. For example, in case of Ethiopia, 8.5 million. In the case of South Sudan, 6.5 million. South Sudan 6.5, Sudan 5, etc. So these people are exposed to hunger because of the locust. Even locust itself is increasingly now part of the climate change, because the climate is become more humid, and it is more warm, and the situation is perfect for the spread of locusts. So locusts are not decreasing. Instead, their number is increasing because the climate change, the conditions are becoming more favorable for locusts now than before. Now, let me conclude with some remarks here. Most African IDPs, migrants, and refugees stay in Africa within their countries, or cross borders, because they don't have resources. They cannot move far away from their countries or move internationally like Europe or somewhere else. Climate conflicts, poverty, climate change are important causes of migration, although they are not the only ones. There are also other factors, but as climate change nowadays shows, the displacement and exposure to hunger and thirst has increased substantially. Migration is, for these people affected by climate change, a common strategy for survival, coping, for survival, coping, income diversification, risk management, and adaptation for people facing economic stress and adverse climate conditions. Now, people are looking for alternatives, moving in their areas or crossing borders, and in order to escape this kind of climatic catastrophe. And I would say it on purpose because I grew up in the countryside. I know what the problems the farmers are exposed to, on no fault of their own. They have nothing contributed to climate change. Rich countries, rich people who consume such amount of oil and carbon and coal and whatever, and now they are exposing the whole humanity, especially the weak ones, to such kind of destruction, hunger, and that is, I would say, it is unfair. And final statement, it is, in Western world, rich people, rich countries are competing who will be the first to travel to the Mars. Let us invest to know whether there is life on Mars or on Moon, maybe to plan something, maybe even outside of our solar system, whether there could be life. And even space tourism to bring rich people to space. I think it is also from an ethical point of view. For me, it is. I don't know how to express it. Unbearable whether people are starving, while people are starving. They don't have water to drink. They don't have bread to eat. And people are searching for life on Mars and outside of our solar system. While we destroy life here on our Earth, we destroy life, but we look for life outside of our solar system or on Mars. How can we explain this? What are we? What kind of human beings are we? So it makes me, I would say, very emotional as a human being, but also as someone who comes from a region which is severely affected by climate change. And we have to see from an ethical, from moral point of view. So I stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the in-view of this topic. And to the last words, what you said, I can just feel with you. And they are really good questions. If there are any questions from the people, please, you can put it in the chat. I'm going to ask Belachew, or if you have some here, we can give you the micro. If not, I want to go to take an icebreaker. Oh, okay, we have a question from the audience.
Ist das Mikro an? Oder? Ist es an?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I had a question regarding how they obtain this kind of information, because migration is very personal reasons as well, and it's hard to measure that. So what is the system that they use to get these statistics?
They're from the UN, etc. You mean? Which statistic you are saying, talking about?
Just the numbers about what are the main reasons of the three main reasons you were explaining about migration. How do they obtain that information?
The
Belachew,
true.
I think in the first slides you show us the three main reasons.
The theoretical ones, okay. Okay, okay, I understand the theoretical approaches to migration. Of course, I mean, that is more from the economic point of view. How they measure is that, of course, they collect data based on who moves from where, for what reason. There are interviews that take place with the people at home, with the people on the way, and people at destination. There are many studies from IOM, from the International Organization for Migration, from economists, and from sociologists. So there are different data which show the causes of migration, why people move, what is their economic background, economic situation, what are other causes like conflict, and the level of education and their aspirations to move. So there are different, there is different information, especially also from the World Bank and similar institutions that they put together, and also individual researchers and different universities that research on the causes of migration. So depending on your field, if you are more sociologist or economist or political scientist, you focus on different areas. But anyway, there are a lot of information from different disciplines. Is that your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is on the same topic. You have shown us the reasons for migrations, for the climate migrations, 5 slides before, I think. You want to go there? And yet, 5 slides
Which
before.
one was that?
I think with one up. Yeah, one before. I think this one was it. Yeah.
This one?
And there yeah, right. And there we can see different kinds of reasons for migrations, for floods and so on. We can say how much people they migrate, for example, for the volcano or for floods, that they go back to the city as soon as it's possible, or if they migrate once, that they are going to stay in these places where they migrate.
Mm-hmm. It depends. There are seasonal migrants. Seasonal migrants are, for example, if it is rainy season, you work in your field and you grow the plants and the vegetables or whatever. But in the dry season, usually you cannot do anything because you have to wait until there is rain. And for dry season, you go to the cities and to look for jobs. But once the rain starts, also you go back, and because you have to till your land, etc. So that is one way of this cyclical migration. But there are many cases where people go and they stay once for all. They said, okay, enough is life on the land, and I would like to be a city man, an urban man. Therefore, I am not anymore interested in rural and agricultural life. That is rather the norm than the cyclical migration. The norm is once the young people move from the countryside to the cities, in general, they stay there. And that is why also where we have these exploding big cities and slums being more than not less.
Is there any percentages what you can show us, or is there? It's hard to say, and they're not
It
exist.
is, unfortunately, it is very difficult to get this data, and to be honest, I don't have it yet. That I'm telling you this from literature, from where I read, as well as from my own experience, from what I can observe in the region where I come from. I don't have exactly the data, how many people stay there and how many go back, because there is no, in many poor countries, one of the problems is the availability of data and statistics on those things. And even how many people were born and how many died, how many migrated, and where did they migrate, and etc. And even this statistic does not exist always.
Thank you. There is another question, a technical one, but an important one in the chat from a student. The question is if you can have the slides to share on OLAT for the students from you.
Yeah, of course, I can send it to you and then you can upload it for them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I would have a question on renewable energies. Do you think that renewable energy plants, PV plants or solar thermal plants in the desert or in the arid regions could help to avoid migration, to produce energy in those countries, like so work like agriculture, that's work on energy, so energy plants, and yeah, to produce energy there and avoid migration.
I mean, whether, sorry, go ahead.
These desert tech projects, it's stuck now. It's not proceeding anymore, but there were some plans to do so. But maybe this be a solution.
There are projects going on. There are small scale projects. There are also increasingly new projects going on. People are very open, very innovative. Young people, they improvise, and that is what I could observe whenever I go to Ethiopia, where I come from, and young people working on how to even for families, because in the countryside usually there is no electricity, and they use these solar panels, small panels, maybe just one module of a solar panel, and if you have that on your roof, and with that at least you can have light in the evening, in the night, or you can charge your mobile phone, and even you can listen to radio. And young people, it is interesting. Sorry.
Yeah.
I hear something in the background.
No, just keep ahead. We didn't ask anything.
It's okay.
Okay. So what I can see is that there is the desire, the wish to use modern technology, especially this solar energy, etc. Is there, but people do not have the resources. And also there is not the knowledge. If you don't in your family, if there is no one who knows how to operate these solar panels, and it doesn't make sense. Besides the fact that they don't have the money, so there must be a much bigger investment in that area, especially in the countryside, because the cities are usually provided with electricity, but the countrysides are much more disadvantaged. There is shrinking wood availability. Firewood is becoming rare, and fuel has become much more expensive. And if there is no wood, if there is no fuel, even for oil lamp, for pupils to prepare for exams or to study, and even their schooling is going to be very poor. So here we have this problem of a structural problem, especially in the countryside. I think in this area much must be invested. It is being invested. I know from many African countries that much is being done, but it is much less. It is much less. It has to much more has to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. In your last slide, you have shown us how many people we can expect to migrate, but the most they are going to stay in Africa. Is there any expectation how many people, if they can't stay in Africa, how many people will getting to Europe or try to getting to Europe?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is data. It was a publication in 2019. It was called Afrobarometer, and the study was conducted between 2016 and 2018 for 2 years in 34 African countries, sub-Saharan African countries, and more than 34,000 people were interviewed. And interesting, this is an interesting study. In this study, what you can see is that again, I hear myself again. I don't know what, there is something wrong. Anyway, I try to explain it, and they interviewed those people who were educated, those who were not educated, those who are poor, and those who are not poor. And interestingly, the poorest ones, the poorest ones, are not those who are intending to migrate. Instead, those who are educated and who are not affected by poverty at all, who are the most willing to migrate to Europe or to the West in general. So among those interviewed people, it is very interesting to say that poverty does not necessarily, this absolute poverty does not necessarily push people to move, maybe because they know that they cannot go further because they don't have the resources. But at least interesting to know is that why are those people who are not affected by poverty, not at all, are the ones who are saying they are willing to move. That is even the highest number. And so there is data which shows that based on an interview, that means the number of people willing to move is to Europe, at least. I think among those people asked, 27% of the asked said they would like to move to Europe from these 34,000 people. So it was about 27%.
Okay, thank you very much. Your answer leads me to another question, but I don't want to be, I don't know the word, but it's not in a bad meaning. But you said the better ones, the better educated, the better they have some money, they want to migrate to Europe. So it's also on the wording from 2015 from the politicians. They said these are not migrants they are not refugees from war or anything else. These are economic refugees. Is there, or could there any benefit for Europe from the migrants, that there are migrants they want to go to Europe? Because in Austria, a lot of, if you're talking about migrants and refugees, is normally in a bad meaning or in a bad framing.
Yeah. I mean, there are different forms of migrants, and migrants who are really in need of protection and help, refugees fleeing from danger. Of course, others who are not necessarily in danger, neither poverty nor conflict or any kind of physical threat is there. And therefore, it is important to differentiate who is really in need and who is not in need. Of course, that is not easy. It is not always very easy to really differentiate who is in need and what, because you need a lot of information and the background checks and etc. Yeah, it's not easy. And when the European government officials say these are not needy people, then the question is, how do you know that they are not needy? It is not that the European government officials are saying that what they say is wrong, but it is also difficult to say it is right, because you have to first know the background information about that person before you say it is right or wrong. And Europeans do not know that, whether this person applying for asylum is really deserving asylum seeker or not. You don't know that. You have to, it is very difficult to check and to verify, but still, as a democratic system, as a democratic political system, by international law, you are obliged to do that. And to sum it up, I don't say that Europeans saying these are right, and I don't say they are wrong. It depends. But for that, we have to know more about the background of those people.
I have a question on a kind of tipping point. So in climatology, we expect some tipping points on Earth's climate. Do you also expect such tipping points in terms of migration? So could it be that these slow or rapid onsets you talked about might fasten or speed up very strong, like tipping points, that we will expect some rapid changes in migration?
Yeah, there are different studies which show that from low-income countries, from poor countries, based on experience as well as based on some mathematical and economic modeling, they say that people would get people would migrate until they earn about 8 to 10,000 US dollar per head per year. 8 to 10,000 US dollar per day per head per year they would migrate. And now we are in many poor countries not even by around 600 US dollars, not even 1,000 US dollars. In order to reach these 8 to 10,000 US dollars per year, we need without this pandemic and without a Russian war now, and without financial crisis, in a smoothly, normally grown global economy, we need at least 80 years to reach that level, around 80 years from now. So that would be the point where migration would decrease. So in 80 years, the global poor ones in the normal global economic growth would reach that level. If you increase the economic aid in such a high amount that these 8 to 1,000 US dollars would be by in 50 years. So the fastest we would reach that point where migration would decrease is in 50 years. The normal one is in about 80 years. So until then, there will be the same trend of migration if the climate change is going to increase as it has been increasing so far, and this number would be even much higher. So that is how the data is until so far. If conflicts continue, because since 2010, 2020, 2021, there are increasing conflicts around the world. Dictatorships are increasing around the world. Democracies, even in Western world, are kind of declining, and around the world, dictatorships and lack of undemocratic governments are, be it left, be it right-wing autocratic regimes, that they are increasing. So if we put all this pessimistic from environmental, from political, from economic point of view, if we put all these pessimistic trends to continue and observe continue, that means migration would increase, not decrease. and therefore we will never even, we don't even reach 2000 in these 10,000 US dollars in 2070 or 2090. We don't reach that because the climatic situation, the political situation, the economic situation is hindering us in achieving the goal which I mentioned before. In a smooth growing economy in 2090, and in a very rapidly growing economy, it would be by 2060. But there are economic, political, and climatic challenges. So we will rather see in the next decades more displacement and migration, and not less.
Okay, thank you very much. If there is no questions anymore in the audience or at the chat, I would say thank you very much, Belachew, for your time. Thank you very much for the deep insight and for your presentation.
You're welcome.
And I hope so. I hope so. We will see us again. Thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you also from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.